Hello and welcome to the brand new American Reformation podcast. We long to see the wider American Christian church fall more in love with Jesus by learning from the practices of the early church and other eras of discipleship multiplication. We want to hear from you. Make sure you comment and leave a review wherever you're watching or listening to tell us what God is doing in your life or how you feel about today's conversation. Lord, have your way in us. Let's dive in.
Happy day. Welcome to the American Reformation Podcast. Tim Allman here with Jack Preus, the fourth today. Now, Jack is a member at Christ Greenfield, longtime friend. He was leading our board. He helped with governance transition, all these kind of churchy things. But Jack is also an epic educational leader who's passionate about engaging teachers, school leaders, ministries in advancing a full and lasting education through innovation and creating sustainable models. This is a man who loves a wide palette of ways for people to learn, young people and old people. Committed to this mission, Jack began his career as a teacher, coach, administrator, serving students at Orange Lutheran High School in Orange, California, finishing his doctorate in educational leadership at UCLA. In 2014, Jack joined Open Sky Education as a national director, supporting the team to advance its mission nationally by growing its school network. Now, let's just pause on Open Sky. We're going to be talking a lot about micro school models, but tell us the story of how Open Sky came to be, Jack. Welcome to the American Reformation Podcast, bro.
Great to be here, Tim. Appreciate the opportunity. Excited. Love the podcast and certainly thrilled to be a part of it today. Yeah. And thanks, bro. I joined Open Sky in 2014. So Open Sky is a really unique organization, candidly. They are a national Christian nonprofit that seeks to bridge some big gaps in education, the access to Christian faith formation, character formation, and then the academic achievement gaps in the communities that we serve. And so we tend to seek out those areas that are most underserved in those three areas, right? Those three pillars. And so that's led us to create a number of different programs, a number of different educational delivery models and systems over the course of our 20-year history, including schools and voucher schools and charter schools, Christian preschools, Christian before and after care programs, character curriculum, and most recently, we've started work in Christian micro schools, which I know we'll dig into a little bit further down the road as well. So, the work at Open Sky is we're 20 years, a couple decades into this thing, and I'm excited to share a little bit more about how we're, holding a little bit loosely to maybe some tactics today and more tightly to our mission to really embrace the change that we're all, the disruptors and the change that we're seeing in education today.
I love it. Jack is also a husband and father, married to Anna, your awesome wife, for 18 years. They have 3 kids, Ella, Jack, and Abigail, entering into those teenage years. Mm-hmm. I got 3 teenagers myself. Fascinating times. We could go down that rabbit trail. We're gonna get a little higher level though. First and foremost, the question we like to ask is, what are you praying for? You come from a long line of leaders, both in churches and schools, and you care, as I care, not just about like the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, but the Big C Church in America and beyond. As you look at this post-Christian kind of secular day and age in which we live, what are your prayers and hopes for the church as we pray for Reformation, Jack?
Yeah, and I'm not a theologian. We have a lot of theologians and educators in my family too, and I've always gravitated more towards the practical kind of lay leadership space, right, in the church too, and I tend to think of things in simple, practical terms. I would just say, I continue to mourn the divisions that we see in the American Big C Church, but also, I'm afforded the opportunity to at times see the explosive growth, right, of the church globally, in the global South and other parts of the world. But my prayer is, and I tend to think of the old image of the church as a life-saving station on a stormy blustery, dangerous coastline, right? And you look out in the water and you see people dying, you see boats crash, and you see people drown, and you see people need, they need to be saved. And the role of the church, I think historically and today and into the future, is to get in the lifeboat, row out to those folks, drag them in the boat and bring them back to safety, right? And again, it's a simple sort of practical example, but in many cases, we've retreated off the coast in the church, right? We've created a country club sort of mentality, and we left the life-saving activities to the professionals. And so my hope is that God will raise up an army of lay leaders across this country in all parts of the church who are willing to go back to the coast, set up their stations, and get in the boats and start rowing and pulling people in. And I think this takes a lot of different forms, Tim. I think this, in my world in education, I couldn't be more excited about the ways I'm seeing people do that today, and just seize the day and embrace an entrepreneurial spirit and just stand up a life-saving station in their communities. But I think in today's age, this takes digital forms, this takes sort of in-person, community forms, and a whole host of other ways that perhaps we haven't even dreamed of. But my prayer is that we continue to see the church's primary role as frontline and getting in the boats and saving lives.
Yeah. What would it look like if every baptized member said, here am I, send me? That is a dream, right? In whatever station and vocation that I find myself in life, I have been called to, I like that image, jump in the boat, or I'm on the front lines, and I need to be more intentional. And I'm praying that more people are just more intentional of having deep, existentially, maybe angst-filled conversations with their coworkers and family and friends, especially those who don't know and follow Jesus, or even those who claim to be Christian, who have been baptized, but for one reason or another, like they're just being drowned, overwhelmed by the cares, worries, anxieties of this present day. They're looking for fixes in all the wrong places, be it political or otherwise. And can we just have more and more conversations to just focus on Jesus, why he came, what he did, what he's going to do, the hope of the resurrection on the last day, and center it with deep love for God's word, the grand story of which we're a part. You mentioned a couple stories. You're encouraged. Could you give us in your line of work how you're seeing some folks like say, this is my calling right now, whether it's in education or whatever, to be those who are going out in the lifeboat to save people?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the work, the incredible work that's being done in Christian ed is born out of observed suffering in their community, right? Families are struggling. The educational options or choices that perhaps are available to many families in many communities today aren't meeting the needs. And I think we can look at some data to support that in the United States in particular, right? We continue to see inefficient systems that are producing really poor results in education. And again, I want to be careful, on the front end of this discussion.
Oh, sure.
I support all forms of educational delivery, public, private, otherwise. Yeah. But I do think we have to recognize when things aren't working. And in Christians today, in communities all over the country, in rural communities and urban communities and suburban communities, some of my favorite examples are parents who are saying, something's got to be done to serve the kids in my neighborhood. And they're creating educational opportunities through these new forms of delivery. And I know we'll get into that a little bit, but microschooling being one of them, tiny school expressions that perhaps serve kids on their street. And they are changing lives. They're transforming learning models. They're creating opportunities that didn't exist, and they're doing it in the name of Jesus. And for me, that's a great, beautiful example of lay leaders, Christians who are stepping up and recognizing suffering and discontent, and stepping into a place that where they can do something about it.
Yeah. You're an expert. You're a historian. You say you're not a theologian. I beg to differ there, but you are a historian as well of educational models in America. Could you get 30,000 feet and just go back to and tell the story of education in America? Because at a base level, I know that our educational systems right up front here in America were about encouraging kids in God's word. God's word was a part of the curriculum. Like biblical formation was a major part of even literacy in general. But things kind of evolved and even have devolved in America, and it's time for fresh expressions. Could you tell that history of education in America?
I love the question, and I think it's an important one that all of us who are involved in education of any type, early childhood, K-12, K-16, adult education. I think it's important for us to ground the current reality in these broader historical frameworks. And so I appreciate the opportunity. I think, and stop me if I go a little too deep here too, because this is an area that I think is really important. Our 20th century educational delivery systems were really born to drive efficiencies in an industrial era, right? And if you look prior to the 20th century, what you're going to see are highly localized and personalized educational expressions, really extending from the home, right, where parents gathered together in small communities. And yes, they formed schools, but those schools tended to wrap around the needs of the family and the child, and not the other way around, right? So think agrarian communities where, schools were, the design of the school, the way the school operated was sort of shaped around the community's needs, right? And so prior to the 20th century, we saw much more, community-based, localized, customized types of expressions, right? And the most highly educated, I think, in U.S. history, if you look at many of our presidents and if you look at many of our key leaders in U.S. history, they were primarily homeschooled. I mean, it was a tutoring system or mechanism, and then they would go off and travel to, residential, university or high school systems. But they were primarily, in their early years, they were educated in the home by parents or people within the community that were, aligned to the values of the family. So the 20th century brought a across all sectors of industry and all sectors of society, a drive towards almost an industrial approach. And it's a compliance-based model, right? So learning in the 20th century can be really summarized by it is you've learned by how old you are and geography. So you time and place is the key function of learning in the 20th century. So as long as you're at the right place at the right time and you're the right age, right? Those are the three drivers of education, I should say. And I'm using the term learning, and I shouldn't, because learning actually isn't a function of that model. It is a potential output of that model. But at the same time, those efficiencies were being honed. Learning, students weren't necessarily learning anymore, right? And so it started mid 20th century where, certain students fell off, and that was okay, right? They got their blue collar jobs and the American dream was realized in a blue collar. But then as you got into the 80s now, fast forward to the 1980s, the results began to deteriorate pretty rapidly. In 1983, the Nation at Risk report card came out. And the quote one of the quotes that resonates with me from the Nation at Risk report card in 1983 is that it to summarize, it basically says that if a foreign power wanted to impose some of the most destructive forces in the U.S., they would effectively build the educational system that we have, and it would lead to the destruction of our nation, right? And so in 1983, we already saw the writing was on the wall. The data was incredible. Not only are the numbers falling dramatically in terms of our ranking against other industrialized nations in math, for example, we were also spending more dollars per point on those math tests. So we were the most inefficient and quickly becoming the most ineffective educational system. So this industrial model, even in the 80s, we already saw 40 years ago, that just wasn't working, right? And so if you looked in the 90s, there's still only two forms of educational delivery, right? There's public district schools and there's parochial schools, right? Private tuition-based and public district. Those are the two models that existed in the 1990s. Well, this is where things get really interesting. And I think we kind of get lost in 2023, and we start to say that these shifts that we're experiencing in education, which are fairly dramatic, we tend to think that maybe they were brought on by COVID, or maybe they're brought on by more near-term realities. But the reality is it started in the 90s. We're on a 30-year trajectory. And what's happening here is we're moving from these industrialized batching forms of educational delivery to much more customized matching forms of educational delivery. And this is critical for all of us to understand. And in the 90s, it started with homeschooling. I always call homeschooling the tip of the spear. It's the most entrepreneurial, innovative. If you were in the 90s and you were homeschooling, your parents were innovators in the community. Right. That was you, right?
Yep. That was me.
They were taking risks. I mean, they were diverging from culture. They were stepping out. People were looking at families going, what are you doing? And that's the life of the entrepreneur. Like, what are you doing? You can't, that's not going to work, right? You're stepping out of line. Get back in line. And I've talked to folks who were homeschooled in the 80s, and it was illegal in most states before 1990.
Wow. I didn't know that.
So only a handful of states even allowed it, right, leading into the 90s. And then that changed. So states in the 90s and in the 2000s started to pass homeschool law that allowed more families to homeschool. So we saw a slow but gradual increase in homeschooling. Well, then the charter movement happened, 20 years ago. And all of a sudden, all over the country, families had an option in many communities to choose a charter school, free public school, but privately operated. So offering additional flexibilities and additional freedoms to families. Right. And then if you track year over year, the movement between 1990 and 2020, we saw almost 9 million seats moved from traditional district and private schools to other forms of delivery. Unbelievable shifts. And so we're talking about a 30-year shift of 9 million seats from just public district to places like homeschool and microschooling, which we'll get into, and school choice, voucher, ESA schools, charter schools. And so it's one of the most dramatic 30-year shifts that we've ever seen in education. And then COVID hit. And what we saw during COVID was a sharp acceleration of those trends, right? And so we saw 144% increase in homeschooling from 2019 to 2022, as an example. Wow. We saw 150% increase in microschooling in that same 3-year period during COVID and through COVID, right? We saw a 25% increase in traditional private school enrollment in a 3-year period. And so what happened, what I'm describing to you is COVID rapidly took us down probably a 10-year growth trajectory in 3 years, and accelerated us to where we are today in 2023, where we're continuing to see innovation, new forms of delivery, all grounded in this concept that families more and more are demanding more matching forms of educational delivery. And so we're seeing a movement away from batching industrialized models towards much more matching model, matching where again, I'll use this term, the school wraps around the child and the child isn't forced to fit into the school model. And I think this has huge implications, right? And as we forecast into the future, 5 to 10 years down the road, these trends are going to continue, and we're going to continue to see more families choose these options. And we're going to continue to see new models emerging, creative solutions, technology that's going to create whole new forms of delivery that we can't even conceive of today. And this, I'll close with this. This presents an enormous opportunity for Christians and the church at large, to look closely at the incredible resources, capabilities, and assets we have in the church and say, all right, what role should we be playing? Perhaps not any, right? That could be a response, but it forces us to take a hard look in this new reality and say, what role should we be playing now in helping to catalyze growth of new seats in in these new forms of delivery. And so for me, I'm just full of hope and abundance in terms of what's happening and the opportunity for us to kind of continue to turn the tide in U.S. education by providing forms of delivery that are going to actually produce better results academically, that are going to be aligned to family values, right? And the things they want to see in education for their children. And then ultimately get a better return on investment overall for the dollars that we're expending in our educational ecosystem.
No, thanks for that history, man. That's unbelievable. Let's just pause in the last 3 years. I'd like to go deeper in terms of what happened, and because we care about the church and we care about evangelism going into all corners of the world, but it appears as if the public school, the ideologies, whether it's I don't even know what woke necessarily means, anti-Christian values that were being pushed in many states, some more than others, in the public school environment, and there was this exposing of that for parents, and they're like, "Whoa, this is what my kid's being indoctrinated into." Is that one of the primary drivers, you think, to a number of these other alternative models, or was it that plus like this is not the best way to educate my kids? So yeah, was it ideological, or was it more just I could do this more efficiently, effectively as well? Yeah. What are your thoughts there?
I think that's a really great question because I think we tend to maybe land there because it's a lightning rod issue today, right? Where we look. You read the headlines and you see, oh, this district's now doing this. We have a Title IX sort of adjustment coming out this year, which is going to bring in more gender ideology into schools, and they'll actually potentially mandate it at many of our districts to embrace some of these ideological beliefs that, of course, are misaligned with a huge swaths of the American public, right? And so. Right. So I do think there's a reality that over the last 3 years, several things have emerged socially and culturally that are continue to disrupt this and perhaps contributed to these accelerated shifts that I've been talking about. That being one of them, I think districts are double clicking or doubling down on things that are misaligned. I think they're misreading, right, what families want, and again, I want to be careful to parse. And distinguish between the people in these systems, in our educational systems, and the systems themselves. The systems themselves have a different sort of objective and purpose than the great teachers that are serving in our public schools, or the great people that have gone to public schools and continue to be, right. And all over America, particularly in our rural communities. These public schools continue to be important pillars of the community, right? They're the places, they're the gathering places, they're the providers of so many things. And so it is saddening to me to see that these social, cultural sort of ideological beliefs are now infiltrating the system itself. And I do think that's going to continue to widen the gap and force many more families. And there's a couple different terms that I'm using to describe what we've experienced in the last 3 years. I call it the dawn of parent demand being one of them, where we're seeing for the first time parents sort of going, wait a minute, right? And they were able to look under the hood during COVID and see what was actually happening online, or what wasn't happening maybe in their child's education. But also the Great Awakening, where they're now waking up to say, and again, that's not the woke, I'm not using that term, but it's an awakening, so to speak, of families to saying, listen, we've actually reevaluated our values as family over the last 3 years. And I mean by we, collectively, we, like many families have said, hey, these things are now important to us. And social, cultural sort of values are part of that. But I think we could throw in things like the future of work and the shifting workplace norms that have now said, hey, wait a minute, what if we had a little more flexibility, right? What if we were able to have our children come with us or do these things at home or travel a little bit more? You can, or even customize the experience a little bit further. All of those, I think, are in that same bucket of disruptors that have catalyzed some of the change that we've seen over the last 3 years.
Well, let's get more specific. We're launching the first micro high school. I know it's not the first probably in the East Valley here of Phoenix, but the first in a Lutheran church context for sure. And that's in partnership with your Soaring Education Services, which you're like the main guy, president. I don't even know what your title is. You probably said in your bio, but you're the main guy launching a lot of these micro schools in churches across the country. And I mean, the vision is we could have a school in every church. It's not going to be necessarily your traditional kind of large, more batched approach, like frankly we have even today in our K through 8. Though we're trying to get more differentiated in our learning for sure, but very much a matching to the students' respective goals and the family's respective goals for that student. And man, we're pumped about launching that in the fall. So tell some of the stories of what you're doing with Soaring Education Services and the micro school movement.
So Soaring is thanks Tim. Soaring is a division of Open Sky. So I introduced Open Sky as a Christian nonprofit. So a couple of years ago, we launched Soaring Education Services, really in response to a lot of what I described here, what we were seeing across the country in terms of this dawn of parent demands. We had parents and churches and church leaders and business leaders all sort of raising their hand now and saying, all right, we would really like to help advance Christian ed and create more seats in my community, but we just don't know how to do it. And it just seems really risky. And, we don't know what steps to take to really create a high quality Christian solution in our communities. And so we said, well, after 20 years of doing the work of launching a network of Christian voucher schools and charter schools and preschools, and doing so in a publicly funded environment, so utilizing vouchers and ESAs and all the regulations that come with that, we said, we started to pray over and wonder, is now the time for us to take a lot of what we've learned and now apply that to a set of supports that could help others do it too. And that's when Soaring was born. And so for the last couple of years, we created a service model really to help people study the opportunity in their community, design solutions in their community, and then help them build, the blocking and tackling a Christian education and solutions. And so we've really, but the niche sort of space that's the fastest growing is this micro school space, and probably should define that a little bit, Tim. And so maybe if I could take a moment to define what we're talking about with micro schools, because I know we've used that term a few times already. And so micro schools are certainly size is a function. The word micro tends to communicate small, and these tend to be small, and that's a key function of micro schools. So they have lower enrollment counts than you would see in a traditional school. But I think that's just one unique feature. I think the key innovations that I would say are a part of a micro school they tend to be multi-age. And so we're kind of breaking apart that, grade level batching sort of by your age framework. So we have kids across multiple ages, interacting and learning in the same environments. They also tend to be extremely personalized. And I can't emphasize this enough, right? So we're not trying to fit a traditional school in a smaller space with these models. We're actually trying to scale, and I'll go back to the homeschool analogy. We're actually trying to scale what we have seen historically in a homeschool family, right? Which is a set of multiple kids, different ages, led by a parent who's not necessarily a certified teacher, but is beautifully facilitating and architecting a learning environment and guiding students through a very diverse set of activities, programs, curriculum resources, right? And so what we're trying to do is scale that into a slightly larger environment where the parent doesn't have to be the teacher, right? And so that's how I tend to think about it, particularly at the K-8 level. And at the high school, as you described at Christ Greenfield, now we actually get to expand on that and add even some other delivery systems, right? Things like online and virtual delivery and to customize further the experience. And so these micro schools can take the form of partial, through 2 a day a week. They can meet part-time, they can meet full day, 5 day a week. And so they can really flex to meet the needs and demands. And I think the other key innovation from a business perspective is they can scale into latent space. Because they're small, they only need a couple of classrooms. And so to your comment about going into churches all over the country, if you've got a couple of classrooms, a common area, and a grassy field on your property, you actually could host potentially a small, tiny school expression in your community. Whereas historically, our thinking has been, well, we can't do that. We would never get to 100, 200, 300 kids. Well, if you create a model that can be built on variable costs, right, you could actually run a school of 15, 20 kids, 30 kids. And you can do so in a way that actually creates a powerful transformative learning model for the kids that perhaps are marginalized in many of our traditional systems, right? And so there's a really unique, I think, ministry opportunity for churches like Christ Greenfield and schools like Christ Greenfield to say, hey, we're going to do this in the midst of what's really exciting about Christ Greenfield is there's great schools everywhere already, right? Right. There's private schools and charter schools and district schools, but a thriving educational ecosystem, right? I think even demands that we consider, are there still families who are marginalized in those particular environments? And by marginalized, I mean the compliance-based model doesn't fit their values, their needs, their lifestyle, perhaps. And certainly their learning demands, right, are a key component of that. And I think the answer is in most communities, yeah, there is still families who are underserved, and there is a role that folks can play. So at Soaring, we really help to try to catalyze that movement and help encourage people through thoughtful structures and processes and coaching to help them walk through the process to investigate that solution, pray over how God might be leading them, and then and if we look and say there's something here, an opportunity, we help them take those steps forward in faith to get it built and created.
Well, you guys did just a masterful job with us, and we're still working with you, obviously, as we move toward launching the school. But it was get a little bit more granular for the pastor or the leader, like saying, I don't know what that exactly looks like to get to the point of launch. This is what Soaring focuses on. It's kind of the dream and the design and then a build kind of phase. So could you get a little bit more granular on that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of work to be done to start any small business, right? So, and what we've done is we realize that starting a school is not unlike starting any small business, right? And so we've taken, practically speaking, what amounts to a small business startup framework, and we've layered over it a Christian ministry framework, and then, of course, taken the many years of expertise to what we know. What are those things that have to get done, and on what timeline, right, to actually be able to execute in creating a Christian school. And that includes everything. And so just to give you, the tactics here, right? We start with feasibility work and studies. We pull the demographic reports. We help you study the environment. We help you identify a target market persona, a ministry target. Like, who are those people that you have a heart for, that you see are underserved, that need to be served in your community? And we really help first and foremost sort of peel back that onion and say, who are those people and where are they and how many of them are in your community, right? And then we help you sort of design a solution. So I always call this kind of the blueprint phase, right? Where, you as an architect sort of draws it out first. What's it going to look like? And we help you draw out what that school is going to look like, both the business model itself and the school model, right? So what are we going to be doing with kids, and how old are they, and what spaces are needed, and what programming is really pouring out of our hearts and our values, right? Is it a Christian classical model? Is it a high-tech STEM model, right? Because the heart of the leaders in the church are so important here, because we have to, particularly in a small school model, take into account that there's people who are leading this and are passionate about it and excited about it. So we help really draw those things out. And then we take that blueprint and we actually go into the community and say, all right, let's ask the question. Is this a model that meets your needs or and serves you well? And then we iterate on it from there. And then, I think for me, it's in a church setting, Tim, it's important to recognize the governance structures that exist. And every church is a little bit different, whether you're running a church council model, policy-based governance, policy governance, perhaps. And so one of the things that we've been careful to do is to structure this whole thing in a way that we've got the right decision points, communication structures, so that all the stakeholders, right, the staff, the people, the board, have a chance to look over the progress at the right times, and pour into that and help to sort of inform the next steps. And And then the last thing is laying out all the once you got a green light, there's everything from getting your facility in order and staffing and enrollment activities and technology, right? And operational manuals, and of course, curriculum and training and all the stuff, right? That goes into creating a school. So what we've done is we've taken that and we've laid out a whole structure to help people walk through all those things according to the timelines and provide a little accountability, right, for folks, but a lot of coaching to help them take action and understand what they need to do to get this thing built. That's the process there.
Well, we're loving it, man. The way I talk about our school, it's going to be more of a college prep leadership academy. So to give folks an idea of what our model's going to look like, it's going to be a hybrid approach between in-person learning. So you've got your theology classes and some leadership vocation classes that we're going to leverage, some of our staff in the school, and then invite a number of leaders from the church, lay leaders as well, to speak into that in-person instruction. And then we're partnering with Orange Lutheran High School, their online learning model. And then we're going to have lots of vocational experiences for our kids. And so our in-person work is going to be, we're going to narrow the learning day from 7-8 hours down to about three hours. And so for the hybrid here is like the homeschool kid who wants to get up early or work late. This is who I was, and get it done so I can go and watch March Madness. I want to stay up. I want to be able to watch all of March Madness on that Thursday and Friday. You know what I'm saying, Jack? No, so nonetheless, it's going to be very, very adaptive. And ours is like a leadership academy, college prep type of a focus. It could evolve into, as we're building our gym right now, our high school model could include like some athletic academy type expressions as well into the future. But again, this is like a new, you remember homeschool co-ops back in the day. I was a product for 5 years of a homeschool co-op in El Paso, Texas. There was no Christian school in the on the west side of El Paso. And so about, 20 families, roughly 70 kids, 3 days a week, man, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, from about 9 to noon, we would get together for some in-person instruction. We actually, Jack, back in the day, we were called the West Side Panthers, right? My dad was our AD. Even for my freshman football and basketball season, we started to have this, like, we would compete against Jesus Chapel and these other small Christian schools. We would go and play like a 1A, 2A football schedule, 6-man actually. It was so fun. I didn't realize that I was a part of one of the first micro school movements, probably in America. And that is the seed of what is taking place today. Anything else to say on that?
Yeah, I think the model that you've described, Tim, at Christ Greenfield represents, and I tend to ground this in sort of big themes, right? You've taken the traditional high school model and unbundled it. And what you're doing is you're rebundling it at the student level, right? So think about, if I'm a student attending Christ Greenfield High School, there's a lot of customization here because you're using an accredited, awesome online delivery for a lot of core subjects, right? They can choose literally any course path they want within that. And so they're not beholden to, we don't offer that course at our school. You want to take physics? You can take physics. You want to take Spanish? You can take Spanish. You want to take Latin? You got that too, right? And so the fact of the matter is you've been able to take this highly sort of structured bundled system in a traditional school, right? And unbundle it. And now if I want to play a sport, if I'm a tennis player and I've got practice from 1 to 3 in the afternoons, guess what? I'm going to be at practice at 1 to 3 in the afternoons at Christ Greenfield, right? I'm going to be able to make that work. Moreover, if I'm really into music and I want to get into sacred sort of music and ministry, there's going to be an opportunity for me to embrace that in really unique ways. And it doesn't require now a big, huge, comprehensive high school to bolt on another program for that to be available to the students at Christ Lutheran High School. Christ Greenfield High School. So it's a really beautiful, I think, expression of what this micro school movement is doing and offering. And I'll be careful to say it's not for everybody, right? But the beauty of it, it's not designed to be for everybody.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be for everybody, because we still have wonderful schools in the community. We have public schools and charter schools and other Christian schools that, folks are looking for more of that traditional educational experience. They're there. And so again, I just wanted to ground us in perhaps this concept of this rebundling framework that is a beautiful sort of expression of how, students' strengths, needs, desires, and values can emerge, really uniquely in that school.
So good. So if people want more information, Soaring Education Services, I'm sure you can just kind of Google it. But we're not done yet, Jack. I would like to have a conversation around formation as it relates to leadership in the church. Your dad, who is now in the church triumphant, one of the saints who has gone before, was the president at Concordia University Irvine. Before that, dean of students at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. And he and I, Jack, would have a lot of conversation about the trajectory of formation, leadership development, even all the way up to pastoral leadership within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and also the trends of higher ed and seminary services in America. And man, was he an innovative thinker, a thought leader, and he was trying to sound the siren on, hey, the way we're doing it, we have hemmed ourselves in. And I had shared with them, many people have heard, if you haven't heard, Greg Henson from Kairos University, it's not just one way. There's a number of different ways. It's not about content. It's about content curation, getting the right leader, the right content, and the right delivery system. And so right now within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, we've got this kind of debate, if you will, around delivery systems. And many will say, residential education, this is the gold standard. And we've got some other pathways, but we're very, very reluctant to explore anything else. We would lose control. We could lose the theological acumen of a number of our church leaders. We're too fearful of giving up what has been given to us over the last couple of centuries in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So what parts of this, here's the question, what parts of your innovative model could and should be explored all the way up into higher ed and church leadership development? It's a simple question, just a simple question, Jack.
Honestly, I think if I'm in leadership development, if I'm in adult education, if I'm building a corporate training program, if I'm working to try to figure out how to, catalyze or grow a network and grow a network of leaders in the church, I'm going to apply these same principles. I mean, this is pervasive. We're not talking. This is not a K-12 reality. This is a full-scale international shift from batching to matching frameworks. And so, as we think about that, that means that time and place. If you're double clicking and double downing on time and place is a key factor for learning. And again, this is not an indictment on those models completely, because I do think there's the residential models, I'm going to go, I'm going to drive to a place, or I'm going to go live at a place for a period of time. I think there's always going to be certain people and certain communities that are going to embrace that. No doubt. And there's actually certain times, I think, in all of our lives where, retreating to a residential experience and doing that is probably critically important. So I would never disparage that. But the reality is that if we're going to raise up an army of lay leaders, if we're going to raise up an army of professional church workers, right, which frankly, I don't think there can be any argument that the well is drying up on the,
for sure,
not just, or ordained church leaders, but commissioned church leaders, right?
Amen.
We've got to start applying these principles that we've been talking about, right? And how do we create mastery-based learning models where we honor people's time, recognize that time is a different sort of dynamic. It's probably the most critical currency that we have today, and that life, work, and values have shifted too, right? So if we really want to encourage people to consider this in 2023 and beyond, I think we have to really start recognizing that these shifts are real. We're not going back. We're not going to, go back to 1953 or 73 and where, a critical mass of people who are interested in leadership development and training and church work are going to, embrace that. I think we've got to start to understand, how do we create a model for leadership development in the gig economy, one where folks are going to have part-time jobs, they're going to have full-time jobs, they're going to have multiple interests, and they're going to be working to juggle these things. But they also, I think, do want to continue to learn and grow. So I think it's going to be important, Tim, that we embrace that.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to right now, insofar as we can at Christ Greenfield. Anything else?
Yeah,
Jack?
one more comment on this. I think the other piece to this is that if we look at the onset of AR, VR, artificial intelligence, I think one assumption we can make is that content is going to be ubiquitous in the future, meaning if you're betting on content, like your content is going to be the most powerful content, and that people will flock to you for content, I think you may be barking up the wrong tree. I don't know this for certain, but I do think that the trend, even in church training content and the stuff we're talking about, is that there's at least going to be the belief on the part of the learner that they can access any content they want, anytime, any place, anywhere in the world. And so if you embrace that core operating assumption, I think we all have to be wrestling with, what does that now mean for us, right? And for me, it's about, how do we insert more humans, Christian leaders and mentors into the equation? I think it affords us an enormous opportunity, right? And I appreciate, Tim, what Christ Greenfield's done, what Kairos is doing, and others, because I think they've saw this trend and they're working to embrace it. But I think we need more, right? I think it's like, all right, now that technology is booming, access is ubiquitous, this is the opportunity to add more humans and people and mentors and facilitators and folks who can actually come alongside people in powerful ways. For me, that I think is really critically important in this day and age.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what is a church, Jack? The church is the living manifestation of the body of Christ, people who are on a journey to become more and more like Christ, recognizing their baptismal identity, and then simply inviting, just like Jesus did, inviting other people to come alongside them, come and see how I do it. Yep. And for too long, I think mentoring and coaching and being intimately connected to the next generation of leader coming up, apprenticeship, et cetera, like this has not been a part of the way the church kind of functions. One of my big struggles, Jack, is that formation of future leaders, by and large, has been outsourced to higher education. Just send us all of your people. And then I'm like, in a context with a vision to reach the East Valley, I, in many respects, am kind of discounted as one of the local leaders in my role in raising up the next generation of lay leaders to even full-time vocational leaders. And that's a bummer. It doesn't have to be that way. I mean, there can be this integration, this partnership with institutions of higher ed, the theologians of higher ed, and then those who are on the ground, boots on the ground, getting after it, who say, man, I just want to come alongside this learner. I want to be a mentor, a spiritual father, a mother for this learner right now. But unfortunately, when we try to batch like we have, those local leaders get kind of discounted. Anything else to add there, Jack?
Yeah, I think we have to just be leery of what are our intentions and motivations. If we're trying to protect our legacy institutions under the banner of compliance and regulation, I think we're missing the mark, because I don't think it's ever been easier to monitor compliance, right, and regulate than it is today. I think technology is proving that out. So if we want to have a deeper look into what's happening, for example, if the key motivation is to say, hey, I don't want to distribute this leadership around the country because I'm afraid that perhaps others aren't going to do it right, or
the right way,
or teach the right things. I don't know that that's true. I think we're actually in an era where, with some very simple technology and some things that are already in the marketplace, we could actually increase visibility, right, on activities if that's what we wanted to do. So I'll just say that I think we have to just be mindful of what it is we're trying to protect, and what's the trade-off there for us in terms of enormous opportunity to embrace growth in leadership.
Yeah. Well, it's a great day to innovate, and as the darkness enters into our world, the light overwhelms the darkness. And I think this is just another unique way that the Holy Spirit is releasing the body of Christ, releasing, fathers and mothers to take more responsibility for discipling their young people who will be the culture shapers. And how are we going to shape culture? It's going to be after the heart and mind of Christ, the crucified and risen one. At the end of the day, that's it. We want kids and older people too, of high character, the right type of content, and then recognizing their unique gifting to bring that gift into the world, all in the name of Jesus. So thank you for doing what you do. Jack, you're a dear friend, partner in the gospel. It's amazing to be one of your pastors here at Christ Greenfield. Kind of humbling for those pastors that are listening. It was and still is from time to time. It's humbling and also intimidating sometimes to be a preacher with men of your stature, humble as the day is long, but also your dad. One story about your dad that kind of shaped me, and I know shaped you. I would be talking about Jesus and his love. And this is a man, your dad, that studied multiple languages, been overseas, multiple countries, written books, blah, blah, blah. And yet the simple truth of the gospel that Jesus died and rose again to give him hope in this life and in the life to come, man, he would the emotion that your dad would show, even as I would proclaim the gospel to a man that had heard it so many times, was so profound. And I know that heart has shaped you. And so maybe final question, you come from this kind of legacy of Preus. If you're in the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, some people even kind of say, well, it's Lutheran, Lutheran royalty, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, fine. I know you don't think that, but you do have this sense of legacy, being faithful with what God has given you in your time for the next generation. How much does legacy kind of influence you in your work, Jack?
Yeah, I think it's important for all of us. I think we have to recognize those people that have gone before us and the impact that they've had on us. I think in simple terms, I've embraced from the beginning a passion for the church and its people. But I think the particular legacy, and I'll just use my dad because you use him as an example, and thank you, by the way, for those kind words about him. And it's always really encouraging, exciting for me to hear stories. And speaking of legacy, I'm afforded this incredible opportunity where I travel all over the country and I meet people who knew my dad or my grandpa, right? And so I get to hear stories of my legacy all the time, right? And reminded continuously, I knew your dad, and or I had this funny story about your grandpa where we met once in 1973, and I'm like, well, tell me more. I want to hear about that. And so I it's not lost on me how incredibly blessed I am, right, to have that legacy. But I think the thing that shaped me the most, Tim, in terms of my family legacy, and I'll just look at my dad again here, because I think this is as I reflect on my career and the things I'm focused on, is the particular point of view he had on the marginalized in the church. And this is so perfectly illustrated by some of the decisions he made later in his career, right? When he left Concordia University, Irvine, as the president, and he joined Bethesda Lutheran Communities, and he had a heart for the adults, the young adults who were completely marginalized because of their neurodivergence, or they just didn't fit into society. And I remember he traveled around the world to create opportunities for those people to be fully integrated into the church and the lives in their communities. Or the work he did on helping to create a Christian university in South America, right, to provide more access. And so these are the things that, all the incredible things that my father did and the lives he impacted. As I look back, I think those are the ones that really, really resonate with me and continue to inspire me in the work I do every day. It's the work he did, and my, many others in my family did to I think create opportunities for families and communities that just were perhaps marginalized within the church and within their communities.
So good. Thanks for this time, brother.
Thank you.
It's been rich. And I pray that there are pastors and church leaders who say, you know what, let's just explore what a micro school could look like. There's need for more models. And if people want to interact with you, how can they get in touch with you, Jack, and your team?
Soaringeducation.org. All our information's there, and you can fill out a form if you're interested in learning more, but you can get more information on my team and our heart, but also the specific, services and tactics that we offer churches and faith communities to perhaps just take an initial step in faith and see how God's moving in education in their community.
Amen. Amen. Love it. Love your heart. Thanks for the time. This is the American Reformation Podcast. Sharing is caring. Please like, subscribe, comment wherever it is that you're taking this in. It really helps us get the word out. We will continue to have innovative guests within the Lutheran Church and outside of the Lutheran Church because the days are short. We need reformation within the church and new innovative models. Why? Because people are dying without Jesus. People need the gospel of Christ, and they need vibrant, alive churches. And when I say churches, it's not just the institution, it's the body of Christ, people using their gifts in a variety of vocations to proclaim the one who's called them out of darkness into a marvelous light. We will see you next week on the American Reformation Podcast. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
Good stuff.